If you have a story or a topic that you would like to explore with us, please get in touch using one of the links in the description. We are recording interviews now. All events depicted in this podcast are real. However, the names, locations, and some details have been changed for the privacy of those involved. Hello and welcome to Walking on Eggshells with an Emotional Vampire, a podcast that above all things is about family. I'm not going to set up too much about today's interview, apart from the fact that it was a big one for me, and I don't want to cheapen it with my corny narration, so I'll catch up with you at the end. Enjoy.
Hear me now?
Yes.
Oh,
we
yes.
Great. Okay. Lovely. Hey, everyone.
Can. Hey, how you doing? You're in Rome?
I'm in Rome. I'm based in Rome. I've
That's
been in
so
Rome.
cool.
You would think so. I mean, all my Roman friends, they have this saying that, you come to Italy as a tourist and you love it, but if you're living there, it's a totally different story. And I found that to be very true. But it's beautiful, it's gorgeous.
I was
It's
just going
really
to say, I
gorgeous.
went to Rome when I was 11 and it was beautiful.
Yeah, no,
It was absolutely beautiful.
It's so amazing. Wherever you go, you can find something new, something ancient. It's just so cool. It's so cool.
So I'm going to cut in here just because I'm excited. But so, am I right that you have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder?
That's correct. So I've been diagnosed multiple times by multiple people with different things, and borderline is the one thing that keeps to stick ever since ever since people started evaluating me more and more. So it's the one diagnosis that I've had for, well, what seems to be forever for me.
I just want to say, and I don't know if you've ever heard this before, I am so excited that you are diagnosed borderline personality disorder. You are the unicorn I've been trying to find
Oh,
forever, because I find I can always find like interviews with professionals talking about borderline personality disorder, but I never hear anyone just talk about having the disorder and what it's like. And then when I tried to find people, nobody, I'd go into Reddit and I'd put up and say, I've got a podcast called Walking on Eggshells with an Emotional Vampire. And people would just be like, that's so horrible to have a podcast called that about borderline personality disorder.
Okay, maybe I can tell you also why. I think the first part, Walking on Eggshells, that book is so controversial in the borderline community, just because of, well, I think it's because it portrays borderline personality disorder in a lot of ways that are accurate and true. But I also read the book and I feel it fails to offer the other side of the coin, and some of the language is a bit pointed. So it's then very easy for a book that's written by medical journalists. They don't claim to have any, background in mental health for sure, and I think that's fair. It's kind of easy then for people to find this book that's meant for partners and parents and those having a significant other or someone they love who's been diagnosed with borderline. It's easy for them to find, a tool that justifies all the frustrations and then point fingers. So a lot of people with borderline take that book, read it, and just can't finish it because it's very hard to confront yourself with, this piece of this something that's pointing a finger at you and saying, yes, you are doing horrible things, without also giving the other side. I personally don't enjoy it that much. And I think there are other books that are a little bit more beneficial also for people who want to understand how to, manage relationships with a significant other or a kid or a partner that's been diagnosed with borderline. But that's how it is. I think also we're just overly sensitive to some sort of criticism, which is perfectly fine. But I don't know. It's a controversial book, so that might be why some people from the borderline community are hesitant to reach out. Because I remember when I discovered that book and I read it, and I think that there was it said walking on eggshells and then reclaim your life or take back your life from living or handling someone with a borderline. Oh my god, I just felt that's so accusatory. But yeah, so it might be the book in itself is a bit controversial. There are people who say it's fair, and there are people who completely hate it.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that, having read the book, and it's also the podcast. I don't know how much you've listened to, but what it comes from is we thought our mum had borderline personality disorder. I don't agree with that now. I think she's got other traits, and I've also learned that all these conditions are on a spectrum, right? So she could have a
Mhm,
little bit of this and a little bit of that, which
mhm,
I didn't know before doing this podcast. I've sort of learnt this stuff.
mhm,
Um, and then so when we were putting together the name, and the other thing was we thought our dad might have narcissistic personality disorder.
mhm.
And then we found a book entitled something to do with emotional vampires, and that's where the
Yeah,
name came
yeah.
from. It's also funny because, like, I actually think dad has a few borderline personality disorder traits, maybe more than
Mhm,
mum, actually. But I think there's that whole thing with the male and female. Like, males, you always think narcissist,
mhm,
females, you think more borderline
mhm,
personality disorder. Um, and that's why it was also interesting having you get in
mhm.
contact with me. A male, I'm assuming you're a male. I hope that's correct. Uh,
Correct.
with who's diagnosed borderline personality disorder. I think that's so interesting to have also.
Yeah, for sure. But you're right, it is a spectrum. Like if you look at the diagnostic criteria for borderline, you need to match essentially 5 out of 9 symptoms, but that then translates into 256 unique like combinations. That's crazy, but also within those combinations, it's to varying degrees. So the way we look at, I think, personality disorders, it's so granular, and it has to be because the lived experiences of people are varied, and because to be honest, I don't think we still have a good consensus on what causes it. Of course, there are environmental factors that you grew up in this and this type of household or you experience these things. But there are also people who completely believe that there are strong genetic factors that give you a predisposition, this very, very thin emotional skin, and then you're more reactive to things. So there's not a strong consensus there. But definitely, I also don't know when we typically think of, how these disorders are manifest in males or females. I also don't know how accurate that can be because, I think it depends on so many things, the geographies we are in, the backgrounds, the socioeconomic conditions, all of that. And then for me, it's very hard to say it expresses itself like this or like that. And I found the same to be true with ADHD when they say girls with ADHD behave like this and boys with ADHD behave like that, because I've seen, outliers to both. So it's kind of hard to make a generalization. And I also think a lot of this comes back from uh, 20, 30 years ago when, research still was at a stage not like today. So I think people are re-examining these things, but as you said, it's for sure a spectrum. But now I'm curious what traits you think your dad has that fall under the borderline personality disorder umbrella.
Um, Let me think. So you put me on the spot, and now I'm going to sound super critical or something. But what I think is a thing where he feels like he's targeted or something. So he feels like he's definitely got like a martyr type syndrome where he always feels like uh,
Hmm.
he does things and then he's being like targeted or he
Hmm.
can't sort of win. He can't achieve at these things, and he gets in his own head about it, and he gets sort of depressive and down, and has that
Mm.
sort of thing. And I think that's when I think of narcissist, I think more of like mean, narcissistic sort
Hmm.
of, maybe abusive sort of things or aggressive. And when I think of
Hmm.
borderline, I usually tend to think of more of those depressive sort of things, which could be
Hmm.
wrong also. And so I think that's probably the traits that I think are more borderline than narcissistic.
Hmm.
Is that correct? I don't know if that's correct or not.
Uh, I mean, it really depends. It can be in both cases, but to me, what I'm hearing is it sounds like a person that's able to manipulate these things and is manipulative about it as a response to criticism or rejection.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't even know if manipulation is the right word for that. And but yeah, to me, it can be definitely something that people with borderline personality disorder exhibit. I am guilty of that as well. I think in cases, especially in relationships, when there are big disagreements and I hear something that sounds like a criticism, to me, it can in my brain translate as a value judgment of a person saying, I'm not good enough or that they don't love me. And I think it's because there's this like huge underlying fear and borderline about rejection, about abandonment. Nothing is stable. So the slightest criticism really feels like, lashes on your back. So I don't know if that's the case with your father, because it could be a variety of other things. It could be just a tactique. It could be anything. So I dare not make a make a judgment on that.
Yeah. um, we so I found as we looked because when at first we thought that mum had this
Mhm,
condition, or then the more I researched into it, the more sympathetic I got towards
mhm,
her. So me and Aria, I know, would have a lot of conversations where I'd say she's doing this and it's terrible. And then Aria would say, no, but that's because it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. She
mhm,
actually
mhm,
she's so scared of this thing happening that then
mhm,
she makes it happen.
mhm,
Um, and so we went back and forth, and I felt really empathetic towards her, and then I'd try to fix
mhm.
things, but then the same thing would happen again.
Yeah.
But then now I've actually come to the conclusion that I think she's probably narcissistic more
Mm,
than that.
mm,
Um, but I found narcissistic traits seem to be
mhm.
not sympathetic. Like people have no sympathy for people with narcissistic personality disorders, but borderline, there's a lot more sympathy around those. And I don't know if that's fair either.
You're right. You're right. I think we should have a degree of sympathy towards anybody that's struggling with these things. But you said in the beginning, when you were just bringing this up, you said, "Oh, I said it was wrong," but then um, Ari said, it's a self fulfilling prophecy and was justifying it. And I think both of these sentiments can sit side by side. It is wrong, and you do have an understanding of it. And the thing is that, I think that's really the right recipe. You need to understand that when you're dealing with people like this, you need to understand where the behavior is coming from. That, if they are aggressive or they're suddenly doing something very crazy or impulsive, it's symptomatic of something. And when you start deconstructing that and going to, what is actually at the root of it is a person that's probably, you know, sad and then going to anger, or a person that's afraid of being left alone, or you're hitting something that's very delicate in that person and they're reacting in that way. When you have that understanding, it's good, but you're still totally entitled to say this is wrong or this is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
um, and then and I think that's the hard thing, because with people with borderline, we're incredibly intense. And I always say that we don't feel, we don't have a from 0 to 50 to 100. We are either a 0 or 100. So like this emotional
Mhm.
intensity is very hard for others to understand, because such small things can trigger us, and we genuinely speaking, we overreact. And then you're sitting there and you're like, what did I actually say to prompt this avalanche of rage or guilt or of, even tantrums? Um, and then you really need to take a step back and to figure out that there's a trigger there that has really nothing to do with you. And that's a very hard thing for a lot of people, because you have to be so disciplined and so reflective, introspective, and you, more than anything, you need to care for that person quite a lot. It's anguishing work. It's really anguishing work, and I've had entire relationships snuffed out because nobody can handle that 24/7 for years on end, that level of intensity. And that's where the walking on eggshells come from, because a wrong look or a phrase or a word or anything can trigger a person with borderline. The way you're looking at your watch while you're talking with them, or you forgot to mention something, or and then this triggers them. And it's really this, that people are terrified of how the person with borderline will react or overreact. And
Yes.
then they censor themselves or they resent it, and both things are horrible.
Is it all from fear of abandonment? Is that the beginning of all of it, or is that just one of the triggers?
I think in interpersonal relationships, which is, for me, borderline, when I started understanding it more, because just a little disclaimer here, I was getting diagnosed with so many different things, and they were telling me that I'm manic and I'm depressive and I'm bipolar and all of these sorts of things. And I had a list of labels that I just did not understand, so I started investigating on my own and reading what others were going through and trying really to deconstruct what is behind this personality disorder. And there I really stumbled upon a lot of great literature. I don't know if I'm supposed to mention it, but I really like how John Gunderson, who's the person that actually created this term and put it as a special sector of psychopathology. I love how he explains it very concisely. And if we are talking about interpersonal relationships, it I to me, the fear of abandonment is a crucial thing, because it leads to all the other actions, and you have this, and they say in DSM-5, it's a frantic effort to avoid being abandoned. And then abandonment and rejection and criticism commingle somehow very weirdly there. And I think this is one of the main triggers. It's definitely not the only one, because there's also very difficult. There's an inability cognitively of borderline people to see nuances. Not all of them for sure, but in a lot of cases, this is what they call, the black and white thinking. It's either all good or all bad. And that's really hard because people are so complicated, and someone is going to have a bad day and is going to treat you poorly, but the rest of the time they might be great to you. And I think I've caught myself, I have an argument with somebody, and in a second, my mind just splits, and they're the worst person ever, and I have absolutely no way, to recall how wonderful they were or kind to me. So everything good that they did is suddenly gone, and they're this monster that's come to destroy my life. And then, you vilify them, you demonize them, and you act on that belief, and that's horrible. But in interpersonal relationships, I would say that fear of abandonment is one of the main drivers, because it's really at the core of the disorder.
You've obviously done a lot of work
Wow.
on this, on yourself, like obviously a lot of introspection and therapy and a lot of different things. Even by the way you talk about it, you can tell that you're very knowledgeable on this stuff. Um, the stuff you're saying, are you aware of it when it happens? So, like, say you had this split, like
Mm-hmm.
when it happens, do you recognize it? Having the knowledge that you have now, do you recognize it happening and you can do nothing about it, or you don't recognize it in the moment because it's so intense, and then later on you come back and then you recognize what happened?
It's funny that you mentioned self-awareness, and I think that is one of my biggest problems, ironically. My current psychiatrist slash therapist, she told me once, you're incredibly self-aware, you're very reflective. So you go to therapy and you have people who might not be aware of the root causes of their behaviors or beliefs, or why they are the way they are. And to me, that's no longer the case. I'm completely aware of it. But then she used a wonderful metaphor that I think I've been just mass producing to my friends and loved ones ever since. She said, "Your self awareness is like a person looking at an incoming car crash who's completely unable to dial 911." And to me, that really struck a chord, because I've been in situations where I feel like I'm somewhere buried in the back of my head, and I cannot stop myself from doing horrible things to people that I care about. And I remember so many situations where I was with my former partner, where I'm just being the most wicked person to him, and my inner monologue is, please, please just stop this, please stop this, but you can't. The emotional stakes are so high, and I think it's just it's such a complicated situation that I don't feel I have control over it, even if I'm aware of it in the moment. For splitting, I'm never aware of it until later on, and it takes me a little bit of grounding and reality checking to see that I'm splitting on a person. And it's not just that you split on people; you also split on ideas, you split on jobs, on many things, and it's so hard, because then that makes you inconsistent, and it's hard for you to figure out what you like, what you don't like, where you want to go in life. You don't have like an anchor of sorts. So you're just splitting constantly on things, including yourself. And if you're very lucky and you've done a lot of hard work, and you're practicing this, because it is a skill, it's like a muscle that you need to develop and maintain, you can recognize it, and then you go about setting the record straight. But when it's happening personally, I've never been able to do it. I've caught myself a lot of times splitting and saying, "Oh, this person's horrible, horrible, horrible," and within like 5 minutes, I'm back and I'm saying, "Okay, this is definitely not the case. Let's dial it back a little bit." So I think it's hard. I don't know how it is for other people, but for me, the self awareness probably harms me more, because I can always point a finger at myself and I say, "You're so self-aware, you know perfectly well where this comes from. Why aren't you changing it? Why are you still doing this to people that you care about?" And that it makes it like you're a prisoner inside your own mind. You're on this like wicked autopilot where you're doing and saying the most horrible things to people, and you know it. A part of you knows it, a conscious part and a part that's not so conscious, and still you do it. So in that way, you really feel trapped. And I think it takes so much work and therapy, and practice for you to be able to break that, or even in part to recognize when it's happening. So for me, nope. When I'm splitting, I'm not aware. In other situations, in other moments, I am aware. But I still, most of the times, I can't do a lot, honestly.
It's crazy. Just I actually got goosebumps when you said about splitting ideas and jobs and things like that. I
Mhm.
don't think I'd ever put that together, and it definitely did something in my brain
Mm, mm,
about how it works inside of your mind, which is kind of crazy. Like the idea of splitting on an idea and then I guess
mhm,
having a strong opinion on something, and then something happens, and then you completely change your opinion.
mhm, mhm,
And as I understand with borderline personality disorder, like everything shifts very quickly. So you were
mhm,
talking about how you get, you believe, misdiagnosed with bipolar,
mhm,
because bipolar is, they're long periods of time, right? You go
mhm,
through a whole
mhm,
manic or hyper state, whereas borderline personality disorder, you go through these emotions like literally within an hour or something. Like
mhm,
it's up and
mhm.
down. So does that mean with ideas as well, where you can strongly believe something, and then for 1 hour you completely disagree with that initial idea, and
Mhm.
then come back to it again?
To me personally, yes, absolutely. To me
That's got to
personally,
be exhausting, right?
it's exhausting, it's confusing, and to the people around me, very annoying.
Yeah.
It is how it is. With bipolar, for sure, it lasts longer. And the way that I've looked at it, because whenever I've gotten, called bipolar, and it's been happening a lot in the past year, it happened 2 times. And I mean, I just don't even consider it anymore. Um, I've always looked at it, for a person with borderline, a lot of the triggers are external, what's happening, and that triggers the mood and everything. And usually it's things you don't even acknowledge or recognize. And then with people who are bipolar, and I had a partner who was bipolar, it's more internal. It's more internal. And I think there are stronger genetic traits that determine this inner working of when these shifts in mood happen and how long they last. And that's why it's also, it's proven to be, treated more successfully with medication than with borderline. Meds, of course, help manage a lot of symptoms and behaviors in borderline, but then, I think it's because the moods change so rapidly and are so unpredictable. It's very, very hard to just rely on medications. Though even people with borderline personality disorder can get other things that then cause them to have mood shifts or mood disorders that leave them depressed or manic for days on end. Um, I, for example, I suffer from insomnia as well, and for me, when I hit like 3 days of no sleep, I'm entirely manic. I'm entirely manic. And then that lasts as long as until I crash. And then when I crash and I wake up, it's another story.
I was looking into it. So dialectical behavioral therapy seems to be
Mhm,
what the gold standard therapy that they say,
mhm,
and which when I was looking into it, it sounds super intensive. Like phone call check-ins, like it's a very consistent therapy. I
mhm.
guess because there's so many ups and downs and changes, so you're basically getting a lot of coaching. Sounds very expensive. Um, uh, is that, when you say therapy, is that the type of thing you're doing, or do you have something else that you're?
Oh, I'm doing. I mean, I've experienced a lot of different things. I've been with people who are therapists, who are Jungian therapists, so who believe in the collective unconsciousness, who would interpret my dreams. I've done the regular talk therapy. I've done just cognitive, and I've done DBT, which is the gold standard. Because the person who founded that technique also suffered from borderline, and she looked at that. DBT is intense. I've never done it in the full, I would say, very Western way of the phone calls and everything and the constant checkups. I think that's really for people who are a group that is prone to a lot of behaviors that are problematic. I've never had it around the clock or daily. I've had regular therapy sessions, which I still have, but DBT to me has always been why I love it is because it gives you skills to solve things. So it tells you if you're feeling this way, here's what you can do. Check the facts. Ask yourself these questions or these type of guiding questions. Reflect. Or it tells you you're feeling this and this way. So try this. For example, try opposite action. If you're feeling horrible and you just want to lay in bed the whole morning and not do anything and be in complete darkness, force yourself to go have a walk, to put on music, to do something nice for yourself. And I think this is, there's some sort of old worldsy wisdom in that, because I remember my grandpa would always say, oh, you're feeling bad or just like that, go work out, go take a walk, go for a run. And I think there's some of that wisdom there, but DBT really provides you with a set of skills to be able to cope with the symptoms while you're doing therapy and getting better. So it will give you grounding techniques. It will give you things to slow down this rapid progression of emotions and thoughts and everything so that it can become more manageable. And I personally use the grounding techniques quite a lot. And I recommended it to people who don't have borderline because it's, it's something that helps. It brings you back in the moment. And a lot of people use it as well. It might be cliche, but I know in the army they use some things that are very, very dialectical behavioral therapy skills, like box breathing or whatever, grounding. Describe these things around you: 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, 3 things these types of things are incredibly useful because you have to live day by day and you have to manage these things. So for me, talk therapy was good, but then it never gave me something that I could, you know, when the session ends, take away and work on. Because again, for me, being very reflective and knowing the root causes of my issues, I didn't need to have session after session where we talk about, well, your family was like this and you got sexually assaulted and that's why you believe this and you believe that. I knew that. I knew that. I knew the why, I needed the how. And DBT gave me the how, but I never practiced it exclusively. It really depends from practitioner to practitioner. And what I've seen is that a lot of them mix in different elements. So it's very pluralistic. They bring in something from DBT, they bring in something from psychodynamic therapies or whatever. I'm not a medical professional myself, but this is what I've seen. Because I also remember when I was looking for a new psychiatrist, a new psychotherapist, I was looking for people who can do dialectical behavioral therapy. And there's not a lot of them where I live. So I had to find others. And a lot of them do agree that DBT is great. And from what I understand, it's very successful in managing patients, people who are suicidal or have suicidal thoughts.
Because that's what when I was looking into that dialectical
Mhm.
behavioral therapy, like it started off for borderline personality disorder, but then they use it for so many things. But
Mhm.
definitely, suicidal impulses is one of the main reasons why it was put into practice. I think because there's such a high percentage of suicide, a high level of suicide rates for people with borderline personality disorder. In a few of the interviews that I found, they talk about how there's a high level of suicidal actions in the borderline community, but often they're not really trying to kill themselves. They're actually just doing it for attention. I actually thought this was kind of an asshole thing to say.
I would say it depends, and I don't think it's an asshole thing to say if it's true. It's an observation, at least how I would classify it as. But again, it's so intricate, this cycle of wanting the attention and everything. And the way that I've explained it and that I've understood based on what John Gunderson writes is that, you grow up, if there are environmental factors, you grow up and you don't receive the type of care and the type of love that you deserve and you need. And you do realize that, when you are vulnerable or when you are sick, people take care of you. And when you are, doing these very extreme things, people pay attention to you. They become your caretakers, your life support machine. But what happens is that takes such an emotional toll on people that they leave, and you're back at the beginning where someone's abandoned you. So most of the time, I would say, follow up on all of these actions that are horrible, including self harm and all sorts of punishments and suicide attempts or ideation. And you do that, and then another person comes along or somebody comes and pays attention, wants to help you, and you're receiving again that attention. And that's a vicious cycle in itself. So I would say that there are people who've learned to weaponize it, not on purpose, but because they've observed a pattern. The pattern was, if I'm screwed up enough and I'm such a mess, people are paying attention to me. They're looking at me, they're thinking of me. I'm getting the care that I feel I was neglected or that I didn't receive. And that inner child is getting it. But that's very hard because, and I've seen it in my own life, when your friends or your loved ones have to be your caretakers as well. And I'm not just saying therapists, but people who make sure that you brush your teeth, that you don't cut yourself, that you don't do something crazy or impulsive. My gosh, the emotional strain it takes on them. I mean, they could be the most lovely, giving people in the world. There is a limit that we can all give without losing a little bit of space for ourselves that we all need. So I've had relationships where my partners would turn into full on life support machines. But the thing with that is, the second the life support machine is unplugged or it stops working, It's lights out. It needs to be working 24/7. So it's incredibly dangerous.
That's very draining for the other people.
I think it's horrible, and I regret so often putting people in that situation and not trying to be a little bit more independent. And I think, there are strong elements of codependency, because again, if we go back to fear of abandonment, fear of people leaving you or being alone, you need this constant reassurance. You need to know that the person is going to be there. For example, I read in a book that I don't even remember the title of. It says the person with borderline personality disorder, they don't believe that the sun is going to rise every morning. They have to go out there and see it themselves, even if the sun has risen and set for thousands of years. They need to see it themselves, and this lack of object permanence in relationships is so brutal on the other person, because they need constant contact and reassurance that the other person cares, that they are there, that they're not going to leave. And that becomes a full-time job, not just loving the person and enjoying being with them, but also reassuring them that everything is fine, that you're not going to leave, that you care about them, that you're not betraying them. All of this, it's so draining. It's so draining. And I think it's incredibly hard to see when you are a borderline person, because you feel it's normal, and if you are like me, you can intellectualize it and you can say, this is a basic need that I have in a relationship that you need to fulfill. And if you can't, we're not compatible. But that's horrible. You're then being very, very manipulative to the person that you care about. You're intellectualizing something that goes beyond the basic need, that's really complex, because nobody can give you that sense of inner reassurance and stability that people aren't going to leave, or that if they leave, your life isn't going to fall apart. It needs to come from yourself. And that's what people with BPD struggle with the most, finding that anchor that's internal, not just for relationships, but for a lot of things, and not external. Because anything that's external can go, anything can, people can leave, they can change their minds. You need to be able to pick yourself up and to stay there, and to be able to take care of yourself. So it's genuinely horrible. And I mean, I live a life of pure guilt and embarrassment and shame when I remember the types of things I made people go through.
So I'm getting a sense, because you talked about there's a lot of ideas about what causes borderline personality disorder, and you're saying some say it's from past experiences, some are saying it's to do with brain chemistry, whatever it is. I got the impression, and feel free to say as much or as little as you like on this. I get the impression that your experience, and maybe you believe that it does come more from external factors, things that have happened to you, maybe in your youth, that cause it. Do you believe that's the main cause of it? And is that what happened with you? If you're happy to talk about that.
No, for sure. I don't know if I can say that it's a main cause for everyone with borderline. I do think there are factors on both sides, for sure. I have personally never done anything to confirm the genetic factors from my side. But I've read and saw and seen that there's research that confirms that certain areas of the brain are more active in some individuals with borderline personality disorder, that can lead to them reacting more intensely. But then also the environmental factors, so your surroundings, the household you grew up in, the relationship with your parents and friends and loved ones, these do matter profoundly. And I mean, that's just common sense, absolutely common sense. And in my case, I do think that shaped me the most, because I grew up in a very dysfunctional household where there was domestic abuse and violence and all sorts of things, and sexual assault and all of that commingling for years. So of course that impacts oneself and shapes how somebody perceives things. And again, if you're a kid and your primary caretaker or your parent, they're not able to provide you with the type of care that you need, or even worse, they abuse you. To me, I've always gone back to how is that kid reasoning? If you're a kid and this is happening to you, you can draw several conclusions. You can think that this person is evil, and that's horrifying. That the person who's supposed to take care of you is just a wicked, rotten person. You can think that it's just happening because it's random, and then that makes life inconsistent, and you're afraid of everything. Or what I think happens in the majority of cases, you can blame it on yourself, and you can say, there must be something wrong with me, that I am not getting the love that I need, or that I'm being subject to harassment and abuse and violence. Because when you blame it on yourself, there is a sense of control. You can say, I can change. I can become better. I can stop doing this, which is of course false because it was never to do with you. But then you learn from a very young age that there's something inherently wrong with you, and that that's why people mistreat you, or that's why people abandon you, and that's horrible. But I've lived a life where my whole life I thought, I'm not likable as a person. I'm not likable as a person. I'm only likable because of either professional achievements or because I have any type of knowledge, something. I never felt I was likable as a person inherently based on who I am. So I always felt that I needed to compensate. And I was able to, trace this back to what was happening to me as a kid, and probably conclusions that I came up with, which is that I'm experiencing these horrible things because there's something wrong with me. And that kind of, I carried it into adulthood.
I'm so sorry that that all happened to you when you were so young. Just wanted to
Thanks.
say that, like,
No, thank you. But
and
I,
you
I
sound like
genuinely,
a lovely person, just like a
oh,
genuinely nice
thank you.
person.
Thank you. I mean, it's hard to accept that because I can now tell myself, yes, I sound like a lovely person because I'm speaking very eloquently and I'm knowledgeable about the topic and everything. But if you had to spend 24 hours with me, probably you would think the other way. So it's
I've
so
had a lot
easy
of,
when you're
um,
reflective and introspective. It's so easy for you to turn it around and find an excuse why somebody wouldn't like you as a person. But I do appreciate it. I really do.
yeah, no, I mean, because I still think mum has a lot of borderline personality things, and I guess I'm very trained to be there for other people, and I like that about me. But yes, I like to be there.
Aria does do like a bit of the doormat thing, so she's had a few
Doormat thing's lovely.
Yeah, that makes it sound great.
a few things like this.
People need to know that you're gonna be there, but sometimes I know where my point is now. So I've learnt that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people still are struggling with that to figure out, up until which point am I going to be disavailable and disunderstanding and disforgiving. Um, and both sides of the spectrum are hard. If you're completely cold and indifferent, and if you're forgiving everything and tolerating anything. I do think people should forgive on the whole because that's just my own personal philosophy. But tolerating is not something that I think everybody needs to do. There are certain things you tolerate and you understand, but you kind of have to set a lot of boundaries, because otherwise you're just, what you tolerate is what you're teaching the other person how to treat you, and that's it's genuinely a mess. It's genuinely a mess. Humans are terribly complicated.
Are you in a relationship now?
No, no, I've been out of one for, it's going to be, no, it has been 2 years now.
Okay. Because the way you were talking, it sounds like you are quite critical of yourself, which you've said as well is a difficult thing about having had so much therapy, is that you're very self aware. Um, but do you believe that you're going to find the right person, and you're gonna get that forever person?
I think I already did find a lot of right people, or at least two, honestly. When I reflect on it and when I think about it, and for me, it was really that our relationship was wonderful, but it was very intense, and there were things that were just so incompatible. The one thing that was so present in all of my relationships is that people keep telling me, you're so intense, you want too much, you need too much. One of my ex-partners told me even, you don't want a boyfriend, you want a husband to be buried with. And as horrible
Wow.
as it sounds, at the time, it was probably true. Again, going back to that object permanence thing, I don't know
Uh-huh.
that you love me unless you show it to me every second of the day, which is horrible and a huge task. But I mean, I'm now in the state of mind where I'm just telling myself, I don't even want to look for someone until I've sorted out some of my things.
Uh-huh.
Because the last relationship I had, which was very long and lasted 5 years and was really wonderful and intense, um, I entered it because it was great and because we were very compatible and we had endless conversations when we enabled each other to grow personally and professionally, and all the boxes were ticking. But just some of these very, very fundamental, what I was able to give him and what he was able to give me, and the condition that I have, it didn't match up. And over the years, a lot of resentment built up. to the point where communication suffered, because if you're afraid that opening a conversation is going to lead to another argument and me exploding and having this BPD rage, which is a huge thing with me, you just stop telling that person and you stop telling them. And what I found to be the horrible thing about that is the second you don't share a concern or something that hurt you with another person, you also don't give them the chance to change or to prove you wrong. You don't give me as a person with that condition a chance to show you that maybe I won't explode, because you've been trained, not trained, you've learned to expect that. But then in your own head you become judge, jury, and executioner. You make all the conclusions and you make your decision, and that's the horrible thing. So I think it's because it's so hard to have an honest conversation about something that's hurt you or something that you want that the other person may not want. And it's then 10 times harder when the person has this type of emotional sensitivity and is able to go from 0 to 100 in a split second. So I do think there are a lot of people out there who I could be compatible with and who I can find. And nowadays I've even stopped thinking about it, because a couple of months ago I was talking to one person who was very much into me and was planning to come see me, to travel from another country here, and was asking me, when can I? And we were very compatible intellectually and emotionally, and we had shared interests, which to me is a good foundation, and a shared humor. And then he finds out from another person, not even a friend of mine, but an acquaintance that knew me. He finds out that I have borderline, and he completely drops everything. And he said, "You should have been upfront about this. You should have told me." And I said, "I don't know you well enough to bring up something that's so, first of all, it's a loaded term. To
Yeah.
tell somebody who may not know about it that I have it, they can Google it and they can see all of these things. And all the keywords are like manipulative and rage and blah blah blah, all of these things, revenge fantasies and yada yada yada. So I didn't want to lose control of the narrative over who I am, and then he can decide. But I remember what he told me, and to me it was a horrible horrible thing, and now I'm very lucky that he found out. He said it's like when you meet someone on those dating apps and you want to have a hookup, but you don't say to the other person that you have HIV. And
Wow.
that
No.
comparison of,
Far out.
of
That's crazy.
that comparison of my personality disorder to HIV, which, disclaimer, first of all, a lot of people have so many misconceptions about that, but you could understand the sentiment. And it felt horrible that a person that was very well educated, had a really good career, was able to talk to me about anything, any topic in such depth, and had, a really lovely person, um, that had this really, really strong idea of what it meant. And he said, well, I don't think you should have told me at the beginning. It's not something you can hide. It's not something you can control. People need to know this. And I was just like shocked.
It's
So that
also
happened a couple of months ago. So I put everything on pause. I said, nope, I'm not going through this again. I don't want people,
Yeah.
but also if your symptoms are manageable and some of them are in remission, why do I need to tell you that?
100%. And it's also this person, you spend enough time talking, you think that they would have at least some care for you. And to say something like that is such a hurtful thing to say to someone to start
Absolutely.
with.
And it just reinforces the belief that no matter who the person is, they can have this great education, they can have a great sensibility, and be emotionally intelligent on some fields. And then it comes up, they hear borderline, and suddenly, all the alarms are sounding.
Mm.
Abandon ship, abandon ship. And this is so annoying, honestly. And it's also the reason why I wanted to do this podcast, because I've seen people carry horrible misconceptions. People who are like me, who have no medical background, who haven't the slightest, about mental health in a professional sense, but also doctors. I remember I was looking for a therapist years ago, and I was calling them and sharing a bit about my case. And one person that was the therapist that had a really, really wonderful website and a lot of good reviews, I told him everything, and he said, "Oh, and you're still able to work?" And I just hung
Ah,
up. I just hung up the phone. I hung up the phone and I went crying. And then I remember another time I was hospitalized because of a suicide attempt. So that was last August.
Wow.
Um, I was hospitalized because of a suicide attempt, and I woke up chained to the bed, like tied to the bed, which was horrible, a horrible experience. And I remember before being discharged, my brother, who came to pick me up and everything, he was talking to doctors. Mind you, not doctors who are psychiatrists. These were people who were doing toxicology and things like that. And the two doctors told him, you should never trust him. People with this condition, they are unable to tell you the truth. They manipulate because it's a part of their pathology. You need to have your guard up. You need to draw limits. I felt like I was just completely shocked. I mean, I often think if I was in a better state of mind, physically also, I would have just gotten up and said some really horrible things to those doctors, because there's my brother, a person that knows me, and a person that already has some vague and misconstrued ideas about the disorder, who's being now told by people who are supposed to be an authority on any subject, who have medical degrees, who are basically telling him that, yeah, I'm never going to change. I'm always going to be manipulative. I'm always going to do these things. I'm going to lie. I'm going to hurt myself. I'm going to hurt others. A typical Disney villain. I was just missing a song in the background. So that was awful. But it's so surprising, and it happened to me so many times. And I'm so lucky that I found my psychiatrist, who spent a lot of time working in a clinic in London for people with borderline, and she knew it. And one of the things she told me is, when you go to a hospital and when you go to the ER, do not tell them that you have borderline. Do not tell them unless you're speaking to a mental health professional.
That's
Don't do it.
crazy. That's so crazy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You would think that you're safe among doctors and people who've had to study some of this. I mean, it was a part of their curriculum. But no, even medical professionals can hold such strong ideas about these things. They might have never had experience with people with borderline, but there you are. And now, whenever I'm thinking if I have to go to the hospital because I have a migraine or something, I'm just thinking, if they find out or if they access my records and they see I was hospitalized XYZ millions of times in the past 2-3 years, they're going to keep me overnight or something. So now I'm even terrified to go to hospitals, because when I was hospitalized back last, so not this previous February, but the one before last year, when I was hospitalized, I wanted to leave at one point because I was promised I would be able to leave. And the person who was on duty that time, she said, "You can leave, but I'm gonna call the ambulance. I'm gonna call the police, and you said you left without our recommendation, and that our recommendation is that they hospitalize you again." And I was just like, "What in the actual fuck?" I felt I was in jail. It was horrible.
And you know what's crazy? So the borderline personality criteria, the last point on there is transient stress related paranoia.
True.
So you've potentially already got that symptom, but then you
Mhm.
have reasons to have paranoia, and it's a stressful
Mhm.
situation. So it's like literally the worst thing that could happen to somebody who has that particular characteristic.
Absolutely, absolutely. I go now to see doctors, and even if I need to do a checkup or something, and I'm just like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, please don't look at my medical history. Please don't ask me why I take these meds. Let's just drop it. But I've learned over time to find people who have, who are not just doctors, but embody the values of the profession, have a sensibility of care and understanding towards others, and I just stick with them. And if they retire, if they stop seeing people, I think I'm screwed entirely. Because I'm telling you, I had a migraine for 3 days. I was crying. I was nauseous. I would have thrown myself under the metro, and I still did not want to go to the emergency room, because I thought they're going to tell me stay overnight for us, the fluids and whatnot. And in my head, that equaled to they're going to shut me in, I don't know, the psych ward or whatever, and I'm not going to be able to go back to work. My life is over. All of that, because I've had that experience, like, just awakening, and you're being shackled to a bed with people screaming at you. And that time I overdosed on all my prescription meds, a bazillion of them. And I remember coming out of it, and the nurse was screaming at me, well, what alcohol did you drink? What alcohol did you drink? And I'm just in a haze, and I'm going like, I didn't drink alcohol. And she was like, you're lying. And I'm just like, Jesus F Christ, like, why? Like, but I get it. I do get it, because there's a stigma and there's a little bit of truth behind it. It's always the
Mhm.
case. I'm not saying that it's not true that people with borderline can be manipulative, but I also think it's different. I think it's very different when someone is consciously manipulating you, and they're aware of what they're doing, and they're able to, they're the master of their behaviors and thoughts and everything. And a person like me, that is really sometimes at the mercy of emotions and things. Because if you feel something so intensely, the urge to act is just there. You feel if you don't act or take some action, you're going to explode. You're boiling from the inside. And that's also why we're so impulsive. I had a huge problem with impulsivity. It's really because your inner world, the emotions, it's just cataclysmic, and you feel if you don't do something, it's never going to end. And that's why a lot of people, myself included, just resorted to cutting, because you get this instant physical sensation of something happening, and it disrupts this pattern of emotions and thoughts and inner screaming, which is horrible to say, but and it's not to say that it's the way out of this, but it's just, the backdrop of it.
It's also like controlling the pain as well. Like you're in control of that pain. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Not to make light of anything, but the fact that you talked about overdosing on your medication and said I took a bazillion of them. I don't think I've ever had someone talk about overdosing and use the term bazillion, which I thought was kind of funny. I took a bazillion of them. Okay, I've got a question to take it back to the relationship stuff a little bit. So do you think that there's another disorder, another personality type that matches with borderline? Like, so if you're always borderline's always sort of wanting that attention, is there another type that always wants to give attention so they fit together? Does that exist, do you think?
You're trying to match up all the people with personality disorders. My goodness.
Maybe we can make a Tinder.
Find your perfect match.
Make a borderline personality Tinder or something.
The last thing we need. The last thing we need. Access to more people. No, I think so. I do think so. And I think it's people with NPD, people who have narcissistic personality disorder. I think that but I'm basing this again loosely off of how I am and the criteria that I meet. So for other folks with borderline personality disorder, it could be different. But I think this, because the thing with borderline personality disorder is when you fall in love, you develop a favorite person, and it's really, really hard. And that person is the center of your universe. Without them, nothing exists. Your whole life revolves around them. And, because of that, you do want to please them almost unconditionally. And I've done things they could have asked me to jump. I would say how high. So I think, with people, then you meet a person with narcissistic and they get all of this devotion and attention and worshiping. And to them, it's, music to their ears. So there's a compatibility there, but then there's also compatibility of the emotional cycles that both people can go through, the blame, the guilt, the control. I think borderline personality disorder, people with borderline personality disorder develop such codependent relationships with their favorite person that it gives the other person so much control to dictate the pace of the relationship, the type of the relationship, and everything. And also people with BPD who are at least a little bit aware of how they are, if they lash out and the reaction is too much, the other person can easily guilt you or blame you for that. And I've been in situations, and this is a true story, where I found out that my partner was cheating on me with a plethora of people, and I did not have the guts to confront him about it for 6 months, living in pure torment. And I would casually drop things, like, where were you, and things like that. And I remember distinctly 2 times that he completely played the borderline personality disorder card to make it seem like I'm paranoid, I'm overly jealous and crazy. So there are going to be people who will use this to their advantage to say, you're just making this up, you're overreacting. And then as a person with borderline, it's very hard for you to understand, are these emotions valid? Did I take it too far? Am I right to feel hurt, or am I overreacting? So then all of these techniques and skills that you learn about fact checking and grounding and splitting, all of that is, you can just chuck it to the trash, because you have a person here that's able to convince you that you're overreacting, that it's one of your symptoms, and that nothing is happening, and that it's all your fault. And then you feel horrible and sad, and you cut or you burn or you starve yourself. And then you get into that very vulnerable position where that person, again, can take care of you and assert a dominance and reinforce the belief that without them, you would crumble, you would die. So I think the compatibility there is crazy if the symptoms match, because, the person with NPD can get a lot of things. The borderline person may not even ever question the partner. and the cycle of abuse just continues.
It's so wild that we did an interview with someone who said they
Hmm.
had narcissistic traits, and I really enjoyed the interview. And one of the big things was their relationship with their wife. Like that was the thing they wanted to change for, and they wanted to be good for, is because they really had the wife like on the pedestal, or the relationship was so close, like you said. And I don't want to belittle that conversation or that, because I actually think it was a really beautiful, what he was saying was like, sounded like a perfect relationship.
Hmm.
But it's just interesting that you brought that up, and then just sort of hearing someone, the way they're talking about their relationship and the amount of dependence they do have on that partner, like you said, seems to match.
Yeah, I think so. It's problematic because on the surface level, it looks like, they're fulfilling each other's needs. And the narcissistic person can use the borderline person for all sorts of things, for validation and everything. But I feel that they can trigger a lot more this fear of abandonment. But again, all of the different needs can be fulfilled. So if you have a need or a desire for this type of admiration, devotion, and to control someone, it's complementary, but it's dysfunctional. That's the thing. It's complementary on a dysfunctional level. So the dynamic becomes really, really horrible. And I think to me, it's just a recipe for crazy instability, and it's unhealthy. And that's not to say that these people can't make it work if they are, at a stage of their life where some symptoms are very manageable and don't manifest. But that's true for every relationship, even for people that don't have personality disorders. If you have a lot of your things figured out and the other person does, of course it's going to be much easier than if you don't. Yeah, I think there's a complementary dysfunctionality there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, go for it, Ariel.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you've got, it sounds like you've got a good base of friends that know that you've got borderline. Um, have they been your friends for life, or are they new friends? And like, yeah, basically like that. You've got like
Mhm.
it sounds like you've got a good support network around you.
I think so too. I think so too, and I'm super lucky, and I feel blessed when I think about it. It does make it hard for sure, and it's not to say that people are understanding 100% of the times, but then nobody is. Nobody is. But the friends that I have currently that I consider my best friends, we've been friends for 6, 7 years since I moved to Italy. But I mean, I also count which is so strange, and I know we shouldn't, and people have different opinions of that. I count my psychiatrist as someone that really has gone above and beyond. So not just during therapy, but to in so many things that just go beyond the job description to make sure that I'm fine, to help me find medical professionals I can trust, to help me sort out things that I might know, financial things, tax, administrative, all sorts of things. So I think that I really hope that anybody struggling with any type of mental health issue finds somebody that's able to do the job because they care about others and not just because it can happen. But I have a solid friend group, very, very small one, a tiny one, but that's how I prefer it as well.
That's all you need, though.
That's true.
Just a few good
That's true.
friends.
Yeah.
One other quick question. Why did you first go to therapy, and like how old were you, if you don't mind asking?
Oh gosh, I had a lot of trouble at school, and thinking back, it was not even academically, just like interpersonally. Thinking back, it was like telltale signs of borderline. I had these huge tantrums and issues with rage, and I would get into these fights, and it got bad to a situation where one time a teacher slapped me, and I think then I was around 8 or 9, which was horrible.
Wow.
Horrible. Yeah,
What?
yeah. Yeah, well, I'm Slavic. I do not come from the from the world where that wasn't in practice when I was young. So, but the thing about me is that I'm incredibly good at blocking out memories and experiences, and I have no recollection of that. I also have no recollection of being sexually assaulted. It's like through a haze, really through a haze. But I started seeing people first, like the school counselor, when I was in high school, so around 13, 14. Really, it was 14 when everything kicked off. And then she said to me quite plainly, "This is more than I can handle and understand. You need to see someone." And that's when she took me to a psychiatrist. I grew up in a very small place. It was like 30,000 people. It's like a mountainous area in the middle of nowhere. And that psychiatrist told me, "Yes, you're bipolar." And I said, "Okay, I'm bipolar." So I had that belief. And then throughout high school, Mind you, she just told me I'm bipolar, take these meds, no therapy, no nothing. And then as I was going through high school, a lot of things were happening interpersonally. I started seeing more and more therapists. I changed countries, looked for a lot of different therapists. And it was really somewhere, I would say, around the age of 17, 18, that people started really, really, really telling me, no, this is definitely bipolar. This is definitely borderline. And then I moved 18, 19. I remember I got the first diagnosis officially of that, along with others. And that's just been what's been following me since then.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it's good that you eventually got the right diagnosis that fit you, but also at least there was someone pointing something out early on, so it was I guess an easier transition when you actually got that full diagnosis.
Yeah, I mean, it was confusing because you hear a lot of these things, and I mean, when you're in high school, you're a kid, you have no understanding of what any of it means. It's not to say that at that point in your life you're not able to understand or to deduce things, but the full gravity of it doesn't sit with you just yet. But I mean, to this day, a person that was the head of a psychiatric clinic that I was in last year keeps telling me, yeah, you're bipolar, you're not borderline. And my psychiatrist that's been me for years and years and years says that's absolute crap. So there are so many disagreements. I mean, I'm diagnosed also with an unspecified personality disorder. I'm like, what the heck does that mean? Like,
What does that mean?
how does that
Yeah.
help me? How is that a diagnosis that's helpful? So
Yeah.
I'm just like so confused. Why would you even write that if you it's basically you telling me professionally you have no idea what's wrong with
Yeah.
me. So I mean, there are still a lot of things that I'm figuring out.
I actually think I'm probably going to look pretty soon to
Mhm.
wrap this up, but not because I want to. I actually think I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours.
Thanks.
I'm not going to kick
Mhm.
you off just yet. I do have a question that I'm asking everyone. So with your condition, what you
Mhm.
have, the way you are, do you think any of it gives you a superpower?
Oh, totally.
If you do, yeah, what is that superpower?
I think it's empathy. I think this hypersensitivity to me, I've learned to look at it as a superpower. I don't want to say that, I don't want to sound like I'm glorifying any type of personality disorder, but having lived with it for so long, just the ability to feel so deeply for people and lived experiences that are so different and far from my own, I really see it as a superpower. It helps me professionally whenever I need to communicate with people who hold very diverse beliefs, and it also gives me a great understanding. So beyond all the strategy, beyond all the analytics, the approach with care at the very beginning, at the start. And I think it can also make me a great friend, because I do care so deeply. I will form friendships and relationships where I will want to be there for you through thick and thin. And that can be a superpower in itself. But for me, just this ability to care for the other, to understand the other, and to want to help the other, I've seen it as something that I don't want to change about myself. And when I was medicated out of my mind, because every time they release me from the hospital, they send me off with what feels to be bucket loads of meds. When I'm medicated out of my mind, that just disappears. I become a flat line. I'm indifferent. I'm not able to be there for my friends, and it's horrible because I think you kind of also need to delineate what constitutes the values and behaviors and beliefs that you have as a person, and what is the personality disorder, or rather the traits that you have. So I think that I have, as a person, I care for people deeply, and then I think borderline just intensifies that. And it's not something I'd like to change. I would rather stay like this than be indifferent to the struggle, suffering, or even the joys of life that others are experiencing. To me, it just allows me to connect with people in more profound ways and not be able to switch off when I hear that something horrible is happening in any part of the world or at any point in history. And that's something that I feel a lot of us need more of, because it helps you expand your moral imagination. And that's something that you can do with literature, with art, with a lot of things, with introspection. But then BPD folk have the upper hand because we can sympathize, we can feel what the other person is feeling a little bit better. We may not know what they're thinking or experiencing, but we will exhibit a degree of care that I feel goes beyond what what a regular person, and I hate to use the term regular, what a person without BPD may exhibit or not.
From an episode that for me was full of memorable moments.
Again, it's not a huge generalization, but I think it's a kind of superpower in its own.
I don't think there is one more fitting than this one to end on.
Oh, yeah.
At the point when the guy diagnosed with borderline personality disorder articulately and convincingly explains what it is that makes him and his condition special. And when I say special, I mean special as in a good way, like it's a superpower. And it's the kind of thing that shifts around all the pieces in my brain that make up my understanding of the disorder, and tells me that I need to never stop questioning the things that I've been told from a book or a YouTube video or a Reddit forum. Because at the center of all of these explanations are real-life human persons whose first-hand experience just might contradict everything that you've learned. And finally, from a podcast that is named after a book that pisses off much of the borderline community, I apologize. But I'm still not changing the name of the podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. Walking on Eggshells with an Emotional Vampire is recorded, edited, and produced by me, Lucas Shaw. Thanks for listening.